This is an honest reflection, okay? It's a reflection on techniques that we've relied on to enable teams to understand and make steps towards improving their reliability posture. We're going to look at some of the major activities we've undertook on our journey as the sociotechnical system grew around us. It's going to touch on a mixture of organizational psych and also using technology as leverage. If that's not your thing, then I hope to convince you further that technology is rarely the solution. Quite often it's actually the problem. Before we get into that though, who am I and why exactly should you listen to me? For the past 10 years of my broader career, I've had one job: help make the thing more reliable. To do this, I've done lots of stuff and things. Some things worked and some things didn't. I hope to bring an underrepresented perspective today. Often the talks at conferences feature engineers from megacorp, thousands of engineers, tens of millions, if not more in budget. I remember watching a talk once about a household name. I won't name them. They had an incident on some of their infrastructure that ran Python applications. They were joking about the fact that whilst fixing the issue, they popped over and spoke to one of the core maintainers of Python. He happened to be employed at the same megacorp. This isn't a criticism. I don't want to come across that way. We just have different resources and constraints. I reckon you do too. Now, with the exception of my current employer, I've spent all of my time within early stage businesses, okay? You're the person who does all the things, you wear all the hats. I can't just go and talk to the core maintainers of my tooling in the next building. I don't have access to hundreds of millions of dollars, and I don't have engineers on tap. You just have to make do with what you've got. Maybe it sounds familiar to some of the people in this room, maybe not. On that, I'm big into the lean methodology. I try to bring a product mindset to what I do, even as an SRE, and I don't know if this is a good thing or not, but I'm not employed by megacorp. And I have a proposition for you all. I don't know, does that land with you all? It doesn't really land with me. Let me try this instead. It feels a bit more genuine, but for me to say, oh, I know how to do it and I can show you, I promise you one thing, today is not a sales pitch. I'm not here to sell you anything. I really find that kind of frustrating when people get up and do so. This feels a bit more genuine to me. I can live with this. I can talk about this. Yeah? To set the stage before we get into the content, you're outnumbered by engineers 100 to 1. At my company, there are 7 products. Your organization is trying to bring them all onto this newfangled cloud platform. They're all in different stages of delivery. Some are serving thousands of organizations, whilst others aren't even on the platform yet. All these engineers across the organization are busy making that happen. Your remit as a lowly SRE, make thing reliable. What would you do? I just want you to keep that in the back of your mind while I talk about these next few chapters. Chapter 1, the unimaginative checklist. We crowdsourced and authored a checklist of operational capabilities. This was nothing fancier than a spreadsheet. If you're coming here for newfangled technical stuff, you're not going to get it, but stick with me. Oftentimes, the simplest solutions offer the best bang for your buck. We broke it out into a couple of pillars. At the company, we employ a common architectural pattern. There's a split between the control and the data planes. And on this checklist, we had some items related to this operational pillar. The team is able to access control plane resources, the scheduler, the service mesh, secrets, the queuing system, ad hoc during incidents. That's very bright. Otherwise, local development was a pillar that we focused on. The team can load and develop against the administration or portal UI. Observability, the logs are emitted in a parsable structure and at the right level with the appropriate log volume, so on and so forth. There's an on-call rotation, the team runs a weekly operations review. You get the point, right? Now the lights are gone. I'm having a great run today, folks. I'm not going to just lay out all the items on the checklist for you. I'm just going to, it's all for me. They did it for me. You get the idea, right? We wrote down all the things we deemed to be important. It was a living document. It evolved over time, okay? We dimensioned that checklist by product lifecycle and stage. This offers a certain flexibility to engage at different points in time. Your product lifecycle is part of your culture. The way it's shaped varies between organizations, but I promise you, your org has one. Whether or not they realize and agree on it is something else entirely, but such a thing does exist. We split our list into our operational readiness checklist into two main segments. There was pre-availability and post-availability. Those are your sort of life cycle phases that we delineated against. Within those, there's a couple of stages that teams or products or services would go through. Examples being you're onboarding to the platform, you're deploying to production. That stuff's pre-availability, right? And then post-availability, you're taking customers, beta, GA, ongoing improvement, and let's not forget the often missed one. We end-of-life things as well. And believe it or not, they still have operational needs even though the business has moved on. So we had this checklist with all we declared to be wholly within it. It was sliced up so we could engage with teams at various points in their delivery. So what did we do with it? Well, SRE ran these activities, and we called them operational readiness assessments with our customer teams. This would be planned work, just like any other work. An engineer from both SRE and the teams under review would take it on. The immediate wins, things you could fix straight away, were rectified, and the team can watch and become aware of that through code review and the nominal flow of work, right? Sometimes we'd make a point of sharing things in Slack or having discussions. We tried to get the other team members involved as early as possible to help spread the good word of our holy checklist amongst the team. Now, having a checklist is all well and good, but how do you go about getting it checked? We anchored these assessments around the notion of a product transitioning to general availability, like I mentioned. Our rationale was you better be serious about responsibly operating this thing before you take customers on board. Roles spanning the product portfolios were an important leverage point for us in advocacy of this activity. TPM, product management, director plus leadership, we advocated to them to advocate for us and the checklist. Now I want to buyer beware on this one. You have to keep spare capacity, both in SRE and in product teams, to undertake this. What you want to avoid is having a loaded plan, you're scrambling to get to GA or the launch date or whatever, and you're having to fight for this operational readiness activity to get done. You'd really just start off on the wrong foot and you'll do yourself a major disservice. Accordingly, it's better to start advocating early while the product's in active development. The assessment should not be the first time that the team sees this document. If that's the case, you're fighting an uphill battle. You've maybe even lost the fight already at that point. And it's also a +1 for why you should really have an artifact for what you believe to be a good operational posture. It can become a rallying point. People don't need to wait for you to show up at their door knocking with it. They can check in on it throughout their development. You can socialize it around the organization. You know, on a construction site, there are signs on the wall, and they're saying to wear protective equipment or not to shove your hand in the spinning blade of doom. Do they actually have the desired outcome? There's research into this, actually. Spoiler alert, they don't. Well, they kind of do, but only in certain circumstances. How well kept the signage is influences how likely people are to comply with it. How much signage there is, that's also important. Too much and people are overwhelmed with safety instructions. I hope you can see the parallel I'm drawing here. If you have a really long list, people are going to look at that and go, there's no way I can do all this stuff. Or if it's out of date and 5 years behind, people are going to read that and be like, is that really relevant to my GA launch coming up next week? With this checklist, we brought about a pattern of manual attestation of reliability posture. I'm a bit of a simpleton. Why use many word when few word do trick? What we've done with this checklist is brought forth a structure to what reliability means for your team and what it means to operate your service. Using this checklist, people could attest their reliability posture and they could self-serve that, or we could engage with them through that activity. There were some outcomes of these activities, right? We did a lot of them. They were useful in encouraging adoption of primitives and practices. I've come to see them as forcing functions, not forcing functions in like the mathematical term, forcing functions more in the org psych terminology. These are mechanisms or events or constraints that compel action or change. Whilst we would normally, as SREs, operate from a place of influence and rely on inertia of practices and knowledge, this approach or way of operating starts to struggle when the organization is growing and changing rapidly around you. It's really hard to keep that inertia up when you acquire an org with a different set of practices, or the people that believed it to be one way all left and moved on, or whatever it may be. These checklists and this checklist and the readiness activities, they were great feedback loops. We'd identify opportunities for abstraction, offloading reliability concerns to the platform primitives through them. And along a similar vein, this was a good activity from the perspective of user empathy. We were forced to get plugged in with our engineers building stuff on our platform and see what it's really like out there. There are challenges, of course. We were still outnumbered. In fact, that was the starting premise, and nothing's changed here. This is one of the things that led us to realize we were outnumbered. These reviews, they were resource intensive. They took time from us and from the team. At one point, we did the math and we realized, oh, it's going to take us like 24 months to do a lap around the organization and successfully attest all the services and teams and are operationally ready. Other stuff that sort of caught me by surprise with this, just because you have a discussion with the point of contact about the team doing the thing, doesn't mean the thing sticks after you leave. It might be like, yeah, we'll do that, that sounds great. And then you're out of there and that's ancient history. And my least favorite part, these were meetings at the end of the day. We spent equal parts of customer and SRE time in said meetings, and we were busy. Chapter 2, not chapter 3. I just gave it away. There's a third chapter, folks. Continuous checks. Checklists might be awesome, but as a recovering/reformed software engineer, I still have moments where I think writing more software will solve the problem. So that's what we did. Our problem with the checklist was scale, not the request volume kind. The scale of work and toil was too great for us. We'd been running ops readiness assessments against services for a year or so at this point. We'd built out an MVP of a system that collected metadata from repositories across the organization. Okay? We'd roll that metadata up and run checks against it before rendering the results out into a static site. This is super low tech. This is like naively stupid. We were just testing the waters to see if this was viable. The entries in that metadata, they were entirely operator defined. It was no more complex than a collection of YAML in each repository, which was pushed to a meta repo via some pipeline automation we had hooked in. Okay? For context, this is 2020 I'm talking about, so cast your mind back a bit to where the industry was at with service catalogs and IDPs and things like that then. In the metadata, there were three main sort of segments that emerged. Metadata that attained to the service, so the visibility, is it external or internal? What are the authorization methods, auth N, auth Z rather? Who owns it? What's it do? What's the description of the thing? Operational artifacts emerged as a relevant segment. Relevant dashboards for the service, runbooks. And this one sort of caught me by surprise, but data relevant to GRC and security use cases ended up in there. What data does this thing persist? Is anything subject to GDPR? And where is it pushing its data? We'd managed to codify maybe 5 of the items from that ops readiness checklist. For context, there were like 70 or 80 on the checklist, and that's what we were struggling attesting across the entire organization. But we'd unlocked a rudimentary automated attestation capability. We could write a check that attests some value from the metadata and broadly attestate it across all the services. Identify which had passed the check and where SRE needed to get more involved. As with everything, and you're going to notice a pattern with everything I present, there's going to be some outcomes and some challenges. To address the core issue of being outnumbered, we need to be able to offload more than just the 5 items we had. Okay? It would still take us way too long to do a lap around the org. A criticism of it, this was entirely trust-based. Like I said, the entries in that metadata, they were operator defined. I believe trust for your customer teams is incredibly important, and for our purposes, this was okay. It might not be in your case, though. Another issue that popped up was stale metadata. You can't guarantee that it's up to date. This isn't so much a problem when the current state of the metadata is bad and they're failing a check and the tool's complaining at them, but when they've marked it as good, what happens if that regresses? What happens if that no longer happens to be so? There's a limited pattern of what this thing can attest. We could only look at the version control system, and we realized that operational data resides outside of VCS. Infrastructure as code, your scheduler resources, your observability vendor, your paging service, on and on and on. Operational posture is not just the stuff that lives in your repo. We also learned that turns out we operate more than just services. Some teams are releasing SDKs or libraries. Some people are operating databases. Some people are even looking at this in terms of an entire product, which is an amalgamation of many services in our case. But the MVP did what an MVP should do, and we were confident this was viable. Enter stage left, the reliability data platform. This is the real build-out. We'd prove utility, but the readiness assessments were still too resource-intensive for us. And to make matters worse, we were getting to a point where we should reassess the completed ones. So not only could we not do all the ones ahead of us, but we were starting to think, uh-oh, we better go back to the ones behind us. We doubled down. Conceptually, this reliability data platform was made up of a few things. Collectors at the core of it. There was also some interface, like the API or the UI, for what was persisted in the store. And because we're SREs, we slapped some async processing in between it all. The core thing of this platform was checks. But to provide a check, you needed a few things. I told you about the interface and a pattern to collect them. Let's talk about a check briefly. A check ended up corresponding to each of those entries on our operational readiness checklist. A check was comprised of what is this thing that I'm meant to do as a service owner or service operator? How exactly do I remediate said thing? What do I need to do here? Like, how do I fix it? Who do I contact for help fixing the thing? And we also slipped a bit of severity in there. Some stuff was informational, some stuff was just advisory, some things were critical. At its core, the interface to this system was an API. The UI was how operators, that is our consuming teams, would interact with it, but primarily as SREs, we lent on the API. We could drive some powerful stuff from this thing. We could look at a team or a service or a repository and understand what checks pass. We could instantly get an understanding for how it's doing according to our operational best practices. Or you could flip it around. You could look at the system from the perspective of a single check and say, hey, what in our state is not passing this best practice that we recommend. Powering all of this were the collectors. These were standalone components. We provided the core collectors, like SRE built them. What that ended up being is, yeah, there was VCS. We also consumed from GitHub our paging solution, PagerDuty, I won't mention vendors here, observability solution, instant management platform. We even hooked this thing into our scheduler. The primary pattern of a collector and the way it operated was polling. It was long-lived, and this by far made up 80% of the use cases we needed. We need a little bit of automation to reach out and find out, hey, what's happening out there? And then this other pattern kind of emerged. These were event-driven collectors. Sometimes operational data isn't persisted or available via API. It's like event-driven and it's available at the time it happens only. We kept the collectors dumb. They had one job: process an event and pass it along. As the utility of the system grew, so did its importance. The system was integration heavy. The only thing it did was consume and emit to APIs. With this collector pattern that we'd introduced, we'd made our automatic attestation capability multi-data source. We were testing from all across the landscape at that point. But because of this, we kind of introduced a problem. We had data from multiple sources coming in and they related to multiple things. Correct attribution became increasingly important. Does this data apply to team A or team B, service X or service Y? The thing became useful. Shock horror. I'm kind of proud of that. But we invested in further ways to get the information out to operators. We introduced distributors. These were the inverse of collectors. Well, they basically were collectors, but instead of collecting from third-party data sources, they collected the results from the platform and pushed them out to other systems. Fast forward to 2023, 2024, and the word service catalog was part of the industry's vernacular. Suddenly, platforms our operators interacted with each had their own variant of a service catalog. We didn't set out to build a service catalog, but if you squinted at our thing just right, you're like, oh, that kind of looks like a service catalog. The outcome. We had a flexible automatic attestation system. Over the following years, it grew. More checks, more collectors, broader scope. We'd automated 70% of the ops readiness assessment. We didn't do them anymore. We had made some assumptions along the way, and this was kind of a challenge. We made assumptions about the domain, and the domain grew. I kind of alluded to it before, but we anchored operational data against services, and then it turns out that you operate more than just services. Another one that tripped us up is we are a microservice. We practice microservices. There's many repos all over the place. And then some teams came out of the woodwork and they run monorepos. And suddenly there were many services living within this one repository. And we sort of had to rethink how some of our collection machinery worked to accommodate for this. Another challenge we introduced for ourselves is attribution. That relies on metadata. It used to just be a YAML file in a repository. Now that we've made this thing aware of all the different data sources, well, we've now spread that metadata across all these different systems. And setting it correctly is important, but now it's unfortunately opaque for the operator. The governance over that metadata became increasingly important. Third one, some things you want to attest aren't about the artifacts at all. They don't live in version control or any system. They're human. So that's it. We're done. Production was abound with puppies and unicorns. Incidents were no more, and we prepared to lay off the entire platform organization. I was doing a bit of Slack archaeology, digging through and trying to find some stuff. This was me. I wrote this. 12 months later, I also wrote this. Chapter 3, reliability reviews. The problems of success. At this point, we've been diligently paying down the issues that beset our platform. Through consistent investment, we'd either solve issues within platform abstractions, or we'd detect and surface them through our attestation capabilities. We'd built leverage to handle the nominal case. We'd paved the road towards what we deemed the foundations of reliability, but the organizations and our customer had something else in mind. They wanted more. Reliability reviews, as we'd call them, are in-depth assessments of a service. We took inspiration from similar frameworks for assessment. There were 3 main pillars of a review. I'm kind of kicking myself at this point. We built a bunch of stuff to get away from running meetings where I went and ran a checklist with teams, and then I'm writing a document proposing that we go and do meetings with teams to run a different version of the same checklist. The 3 pillars of this review, we split it out into architecture, where we looked at matters of scalability, resilience, dependencies, your observability posture, the monitoring breadth and, the multi-region opportunities you might have, platform adoption and conformity. Within operational posture, we started to look at things like whether you're monitoring for relevant failure modes, the monitoring breadth and volume. Do you have SLOs defined for the consumer experience? And is there any evidence that you're actually using them, you're reevaluating them or using them for decision making? And the third pillar, which became more and more important as our organization matured, we looked at incidents. Like what's happened in the past 3 months? Have you been impacted by any major incidents? Have you contributed to any major incidents? We would compare the severity distribution across platform norms. We'd look at, are you completing your retros, and what's the concluded outcome of said retros? Pager volume, you get it. I'm not just going to read the checklist to you folks. I'm trying to tell a story, I guess. This depth brought with it a new delivery model. We'd have a point of contact within the owning team, but the time investment was primarily spent by SRE. We'd require the teams looking for these reviews to have a bit of skin in the game, so they had to provide some details of system architecture in the form of diagrams, business context, and the state of ownership up front. We'd do a kickoff meeting with them, we'd talk about what we're going to do, and then the SRE would go away and do a series of investigation into the service and look at all those pillars and work through this activity. We'd present our results to our point of contact as like a post-investigation check-in, and then we'd do a wrap-up meeting. And the goal of that was to distribute the findings first with the team and the people that operate the thing, but then we'd try to go broader. We'd try to look at people operating similar services, and we tried to make this a knowledge-sharing opportunity. Yay, we found things. We inspired change, and we've inspired further investment by service owners, people that have been operating things for years that they hadn't touched and they just accepted as the status quo. We managed to prompt them towards making further improvements. It's not without its challenges though. The optics on something like this are not great. The one that I'm immediately reminded of is you never call someone's baby ugly. And at the end of the day, a bunch of decisions were made, right? Like humans make those decisions for a reason. And now you're a third party coming in. You weren't around when those decisions were made. You're reevaluating those decisions with new information, and you're trying to come up with recommendations for them. It can quickly set you up for a bit of a combative engagement with the teams. The other one that caught me off guard, it's hard to track outcomes. I did a bunch of these assessments, okay? The last thing I want to do after spending 2 weeks deep diving into a service and trying to understand something that I have no knowledge about is then have to write a bunch of tickets with findings and advocate for why people should implement those and address those things. It was exhausting for me personally. I've just presented 3 chapters of, or 3 different types of activities we did. You can sort of follow a narrative or an arc. Just keep an eye on time. I think I'm doing all right. I want to talk about the strengths overall that I found coming out of this stuff. The first one was leverage. The technology assist, specifically in that second chapter when I started talking about automated attestation, that helped us scale a part of our mission, make things reliable, up to a ratio of 100 to 1. So like we were outnumbered 100 to 1. It's not a joke. Maybe it was 90 to 1. I don't know. We were unable to do it without that technology assist. And that doesn't just mean the automated attestation. The platform abstraction, so abstracting common reliability concerns down into the platform, that further enabled that efficiency. The next strength I want to talk about is persistence. Findings, like recommendations or risks or whatever you want to call these things, they're more persistent when coming from a long-lived interface, like a web UI or somewhere that they live for a long time. Ad hoc activities, they run up against fleeting organizational attention. You're in the spotlight while you're launching your service or you've had a rash of incidents, but then the spotlight moves on and the organization is focusing elsewhere, but you still have those problems. When you make these findings or recommendations persistent and you put them in one place, teams can continue to engage no matter what's going on with their service. I'd say a real strength of all 3 of these techniques I've talked about is they're good at finding the known risks. You can put your heads together and come up with what the likely risks are to beset the platform, or maybe you've seen it. We crowdsource these ideas from people. They're well suited to be mitigated by attestation. I do want to call out this is not a supplement for adaptive capacity or resilience, and having those sort of capabilities within your organization. There were some surprises. Something that I did not expect, GRC and security, they showed up as big users of this service, this automated attestation capability. They also became one of our #1 contributors to it. They built whole collectors, they plumbed it into additional parts of the system because they were driving at the same goal as us, but perhaps with a different lens. We were interested in the reliability concern. They were interested in compliance or security posture. They were like, hey, we need a thing to attest this across the land. Your thing looks right to us. Can we use it, please? The other thing that surprised me is the emergence of the portfolio operator persona. We built this for us and to help us do our job. But shortly after, consumers who spanned across many groups, like product managers or directors, they showed up and they wanted to look at all the services within their product scored. They wanted to use this as an input to their planning and decision making. Maybe I should have anticipated that, but I did not. Weaknesses, in the spirit of a retrospective, if you will. Technology like this is highly privileged. This thing had access to all the stuff. We were sensible about it, but at the end of the day, we went through many rounds of review to make sure that that was okay to do. Through the lens of attestation, when those checks, remember how I said how to remediate? Describing remediation falls short of automated or delivered remediation. You know, it'd be better than if I told you how to fix your thing if your thing was just fixed for you, right? As your posture in the organization advances, the breadth of what you want to assert grows in scope. Not all operational factors are technical, so they cannot necessarily be asserted technically. For example, it's good practice to drive down the pager load, right? From an automated system, you can only really look for the signal of decreasing pager volume. Sometimes I'm more interested in intent rather than outcome. How do you detect if someone tried to decrease the pager load but had not had any meaningful impact on it? We still had an issue I raised earlier on in the talk. Manually submitted data stales. Think about a pattern for data expiry. Give the thing a use-by date and flip it to failing after the date passes. And the effort-reward hook, the effort versus reward to hook in manual data doesn't always balance out. When this thing went wide, if we added a new manual attribute that you needed to attest or state, that would hit thousands of repositories across our organization, and that's work for people. I got 2 takeaways for this, and I got a few minutes to get them across. Abstraction outperforms attestation, okay? Like the pitch is pretty simple here, and this is the platform engineering track. Adopt the abstraction once, and you've received the benefits for good. Attestation, by its very nature, implies some investment has already been made. The case to address the issues surfaced by attestation has to be strong enough to spur further investment by the operators. It better be a compelling case to get them to revisit that decision they made 3 years ago. But not everything can be abstracted. Your technological landscape will be heterogeneous. If it's not today, then it will be tomorrow. Between when we started building this and where we are now, we've acquired companies and we've been acquired, okay? The landscape looks very different than it was when we first laid this out. It's incredibly important that you get the mechanics of delivery and stewardship over the platform abstractions right. If you don't, no amount of attestation will save you. It's a losing battle, like trying to push water uphill, okay? All of that aside, accept the fact that your platform abstraction will likely fall short. We're human after all, and these are complex things to deliver on. Give yourself some grace. You're gonna miss your platform that might be great for day 1 is probably not gonna be great on day 370, okay? Like the organization is evolving, the requirements of your platform are evolving. So where does that leave you? Operators' mindshare, the people operating this service, that is their attention, is valuable, so respect it, and finite, please don't squander it, okay? Meet them where they are. There is no absolute correctness. As much as we're engineers and we like to think there is a truth, the truth is a lie. Step down from the ivory tower. You'll only burn bridges with your customer teams operating that way. Reliability means different things to different people. Reliability and resilience is a broad domain. Misaligned understandings of what it is or how best to get it are to be expected. Take them in your stride and see them as opportunities to close that gap between your SRE group and your broader organization. Attestation is a powerful way to align your enablement functions with the realities of those you're trying to enable. I'm talking about that user empathy perspective I was giving you before. I want to leave you with 2 things. Think of the context of the organization before you do anything. It's a bit of a no-brainer, but ops readiness, the checklist, that made a lot of sense during a big build-out expansion. We had all these teams getting hired and all this stuff coming onto the platform. Then continuous checks did. As we moved into day 2 and things have been on the platform for a while, we had this sort of moving target of posture, and we needed to reassert that around the org. And the other part, I spent a lot of time, and I still do, dealing with imposter syndrome. I just want to be clear that everything I've talked about today was built by a team of people, and importantly, with the input of customers. Yeah, thanks for listening, everyone.